Hello YouTube and welcome back to Bracket Breakdown. I'm Nick North, a big boy with big feelings, and today we are back for part 2 of the biggest Power Rangers Super Sentai tournament that has ever existed. And I'm very excited to see you all today. I was very happy with how the last video turned out. I was very happy with the reception that the last video got in terms of views. And so I am very happy to bring you the next part in the series, and I am happy to say there will be a lot less disclaimers and yapping in the beginning, so we can just get directly into it. With that being said, we have one disclaimer, which is that my hair is different. It's purple now, and I'm wearing a matching purple sleeveless hoodie. And last video, I was referencing Jason with the red sweatband. And so today, the next series in line would be Zeo, and I am referencing that with a beautiful handmade arm sleeve. So, yeah, the amount of production value that I put into this is all for you guys. So, let's get right into it. For match 101, we have Yokai Umibozu versus Chikukaden Biljik. And for our first match in this video, Umibozu is going to absolutely slaughter Biljik. Specifically, I want to highlight the title shoulders, the kind of like raft secondary design, and the overall color matching of the blue and yellow is all really effective to me. Biljik has interesting proportions, like if the Blue Eyes White Dragon was also Pac-Man, but it's just not enough for me. Umibozu wins. For match 102, we have Corrosion Saima Beast Jiruda versus Amano Jaku. I was originally drawn to the multi-directional use of arrows and all of the detailing of that on Amano Jaku because it's really unique. I like to look at it. But it's really sparse over the whole body, whereas Jiruda is a slug monster that corrodes stuff. And, like, the image is pretty grainy, but you can still see that the design is full body rather than just, like, kind of sparsely thrown around. So Jiruda will take it this time. For match 103, we have Shinobi Doggler versus Boring Bankai. And we're starting off the video strong with another common Doggler L. Overall, it's muddled and without direction. And that's a real shame for something that's like a shinobi something, because I would really expect it to deliver on the cool ninja inspirations. But on the other end, we have Boring Bankai, and that's not because he's a loser who doesn't have friends. It's because he bores into the ground, like physically. He kind of reminds me of Gumby with a drill on the face, which is at least consistent throughout in terms of design. And honestly, if you lose, like if you have a worse design than a monster with boring in the name, you deserve to lose. So I don't feel bad. Sorry, Shinobi Doggler. Boring Bankai will be moving on to the next round. Match 104 is going to be Yodana versus the Arachne Minosaur. And it's kind of a shame, because I normally really like the Minosaurs as a group, but for this one, it's not even that bad. It just the bland colors and the strange choices in proportions take it down a peg for me. Yodana is in this like pirate queen outfit, and I kind of like it all the way through, which I can't really say for Arachne Minosaur. The feathers are a great accent that really brings it together, so she'll get the win for me. Match 105 is going to be Yokai Buru Buru versus Guitar Brain. And Guitar Brain seems like a cool hang. Like, I'm a sucker for red and blue. Even if it's giving, like, thing 1, thing 2 a little bit. But Yokai Buru Buru is overall just very sick. I really vibe with, like, the cloth shroud over his body, the haunting expression on his face. It delivers very well on like that ghost theming, and it has a name that is very fun to say, which will always get you extra points, considering how many names I have to say in these things. For match 106, we have serial kidnapper Nabal versus Karyadosu. And this one is pretty close, actually. Karyadosu will end up winning because of the like leopard and blue ring octopus theming. It looks really pleasing, even if it kind of takes a second to like really sink in because of just how much is going on with it. Serial Kidnapper Nabal has like pretty cool colors, a gecko theming, and I like that the red area on his body is like a gecko pressed up against the glass. I think that's a really smart way to do that. However, Karyadosu inched out just slightly over the Serial Kidnapper, which I just have to touch on because if that's what you're known as, like that is what people think of when they think of the name Nabal. That's crazy. You gotta get some help or something. For match 107, we have Creator Devious versus Dokura. And Creator Devious is doing the absolute least in terms of design, but at least he's not a gremlin with a furry ascot. Devious wins, but like, don't be mistaken. Neither of these designs I'm super into. I'm not gonna like have these in the Hall of Fame of Power Rangers designs, but in a race to the bottom, Devious wins, I guess. For match 108, we have Mercenary Org versus Dora Cersei. And Mercenary Org, despite the name, is not an org. He is friends with the serial kidnapper from a few matches ago. And his name, like his government name, just happens to be Org. Either way, he has an interesting, like, Oni theme, and I specifically love, like, the leather design and, like, the way that the club is done. I'm a huge fan of the Oni clubs, otherwise known as Kanabos, in general. I think Cersei is kind of fun, but I feel like this is where budgeting comes in a little bit, because I don't love the way that it looks deflated, almost. Also, the, like, hands under the hooves is creepy to me. Mercenary Org, you win. For match 109, we have Kaituki versus the Primogenitor Minosaur. And Kaituki is just, like, barely, and I mean barely, gonna win out. His Xenomorph-esque face is pretty cool, although admittedly, that's about all it has going for it. Besides, like, the treasure chest overflow from his chest. It's there. It's fine. Primogenitor looks really cool on, like, first look, but when I break out my little Nick North magnifying glass and look at all the little details, his face is kind of wonky, and his hands are strange, which gives me, like, just enough pause and uncanny valley to give it to Kaituki in this case. Match 110. General Hedrer versus the Poison Gas Weasel. And if this were based off of the concept art alone, I really would like to give it to Poison Gas Weasel. Do not get me wrong. But it doesn't deliver super well on what they had kind of intended. And meanwhile, Hedrer is kind of the opposite. On paper, it doesn't look super spectacular as a concept, but the way that it looks in the light and the way that it was done makes it look like a really nice contrast over his whole body. So Hedrer will be winning in this case. Match 111 is going to be Magne Doggler versus Ultimate Artificial Lifeform Homunculus. And in a shocking upset, I'm going to give it to the Doggler in this case. Mostly because it at least has a design. I get that Homunculus is trying to give off Gollum or its namesake Homunculus, but it doesn't change the fact that it's like super boring to look at. There are ways to do this design better that I've seen throughout even just other Power Ranger shows. So it's gonna barely go to Magne Doggler. Congrats, bestie. So happy for you and your family. Match 112. Garubo Doggler versus 02. And more like Garbo Doggler. Am I right, fellas? The shame is that with the Dogglers, most of the time, if you look at their concept art, which, like I said in the last video, you can find all of this on the Power Rangers wiki. I would encourage you to do so. Um, you can at least understand the vision they were going for. But then in reality, it really delivers on them for whatever reason, which sucks. Um, Zero Two is another one of the multicolored spies. We saw her sister Zero Three in the last one. And unlike Zero Three, she's going to move on due to an easier opponent. And I think her silver accents work really well with her color. So she will be getting 0-2 points and moving on. Match 113, Confrontation Beast Snake Fist Bracco versus Führer Taboo. Here we have another amazing Confrontation Beast, and I would specifically like to highlight the bold blue and the ring on its back that has that really cool like spiking design. Taboo is just a glob of different cells, which is cool, but it doesn't deliver in the face, the body, the legs, or anywhere else for that matter. And that's for Rur. Bracco moves on to the next round. Match 114, Gravity Ninja Omokaru versus the Akame Doggler. Why does the Gravity Ninja get based on a foot? Why does Akame Doggler look like Black Manta from DC? No one knows, but what I do know is that the Doggler losing streak will unfortunately continue, as Omokaru's mask, despite being confusing, is very interesting and unique among these villains. Akame, I can't say the same, so he will lose this time. Match 115 will be Confrontation Beast Porcupine Fist Marashia versus Teku. And this is an easy W for Marashia. I'm not even trying to, like, glaze the Confrontation Beasts that hard, but it's such a cool use of those quills, especially the sheer amount of them really helps with the design. And it really gives Porcupine. And the chains and leather help, like, round out the design to make it just look more visually appealing than just a bunch of spikes. Teku has a design based on the Iron Pillar of Delhi, which is cool, but, like, doesn't stop that he looks goofy as hell. His long neck is open for Marashia to just swoop down and, you know. Match 116, Filmloid versus Remudon. And this is another one that comes down to readability for me. Filmloid is based off of a projector, but I don't really see it. I mean, granted, I don't work with projectors, so tell me if I'm, like, tripping in the comments, but Remudon is just really sick to me. Like, there's a few monsters that are like, let's add this type of head all over the body, and for some reason they all work weirdly well, and so I gotta give the win to Remudon. I just gotta. Match 117, Inazuma Ginga versus Shine. And is Inazuma Ginga just a guy with a star mask? Yes. Is he gonna win over this little ball with wires in it? Same answer. Fun fact, Shine is the true villain of one of the series, which, depending on how they did it, either could have been a cool reveal or, like, hella disappointing for the Sentai that they were going up against. But if I fought giant monsters every week and then my final villain is a light-up bouncy ball, I might start to question my place in the world, if any of this really matters, if Zordon really should have taken me out of high school because my GPA sucks. Anyway, Inazuma Ginga is going to win because he doesn't make me contemplate my life choices. Match 118 is going to be Utsamuji versus Monster Rosalinka. I don't know what Rosalinka did to make her a monster. Maybe she's hanging out with the serial kidnapper too much. But it isn't enough to just wear Condiment King colors against a powerhouse like Utsamuji, who has this really cool, like, windswept thing going on, and the shrimp thing works really well for him also, and they combine really well, so easy W for Utsamuji. Match 119. Victory General Brankin versus Shimatsu. And this is a really tough one because I really, really love the concept of a Frankenstein type of monster. So I want to like Franken more, but there really isn't enough to deliver on that concept. Like, he looks more steampunk than like Frankenstein. And Shimatsu delivers much more fully on like the peacock Chinese actor aesthetic and is just much more appealing to look at visually, which is kind of the whole point. So he will be winning in this case. Match 120. Denkyu Najin versus Zarudin Ho. Denkyu Najin actually could have moved on against a lot of other monsters because of his like blue eel inspirations, and the really nice patterning on his body is really nice to look at. But Zarudin Ho is just like next level. He is obviously based on Sun Wukong, and I'd like to specifically point out the fact that his ears and his eyes are just more tiny, like monkey mouths, which is horrifying and fascinating at the exact same time. Which, if you're able to do that successfully, you're pretty close to my heart. Match 121. Endurance Sima Beast Garubaria versus Hades Beastman Belberej the Incubus. Both of these are really cool. I think depending on the day, I might give it to Garubaria for a more fully realized version of what Piggy Pac-Man, Dora Cersei, was giving earlier. But the spindly and scraggly, like Nightmare Before Christmas kind of design of Belberej edges out just slightly because of how like manipulative he looks based on just the design alone. I think that's a good example of how to inform characterization based on design. Match 122, Search Sima Beast Deathstag versus Shidajim. And this is going to be the Battle of the Beetles. And part of me would be tempted to give it to Deathstag just because I love that type of beetle design a ton. But if I look at uniqueness and stronger delivery overall, it's going to go to Shidajim, being based off of a carpet beetle, and the purple splitting line down the middle is just really satisfying to look at, and it is a take on beetle design that I haven't seen a ton. Shidajim wins. Match 123, Pekka Zeppelin versus Spin Dogler. I actually kind of like this Dogler based on a business suit, just because I think that's a really great like jumping off point for a monster design. And it's done somewhat well, especially compared to the other Dogglers. But Pekka Zeppelin's like woodpecker theming is pretty effective. The copper wiring sub-theming is really interesting as well to look at. I feel like you notice more things as you look at it. And so because of that, Pekka will be moving on. Match 124. Gori Washijin versus General Cactus. And it is going to be double trouble here on our Sunday night fight, because Gori Washijin is essentially two monsters fused at their back, one being a gorilla and the other one being an eagle, and both are done pretty damn effectively and giving enough contrast to make their combined design look visually interesting. On the other hand, I have to give kudos to General Cactus for not just being an obvious green and for having some interesting geometry that still is giving very cactus. But overall, it is going to be our conjoined twins moving on to the next round. Match 125, Oil Bankai versus Kilt. Kilt is a white and black cat-themed bad guy whose bestie is based off of a wolf. And they really work best as a set, but Kilt is still really sick in terms of coloring. And when compared to the gas can looking ass monster, the choice is obvious. It's going to be Kilt all day, every day, especially if you're a burly Scotsman. Match 126, Zabunian Don Blanco versus the Charybdis Minosaur. It's a wash. Because Charybdis has super sick attention to detail and even some form of storyline with the design itself, implying that he was like trapped in a water tower or water reservoir and came rupturing out into this horrific monster. And on the other hand, we have Don Blanco, who showed up today. So it's going to go to Charybdis Minosaur. Match 127, Aladonian Gyanjava versus Gliding Ninja Musasa Bistal. Musasa Bistal has all of the right ingredients, being based off of crystals and a flying squirrel, and it's from the ninja season, but the coloring and the geometry of Gyanjava is much more appealing to look at, and the white pants are surprisingly well done, still having like the body geometry showing through, so he'll be getting it this time. Match 128, Jellyfish Urchin Monster versus Advanced Yokai Umukade. Jellyfish, barely. Urchin, barely. What I see is a muted use of color and a very muddled use of tentacles. Umukade, though, this Centiscorch looking motherfucker, he's cooking. He is non-traditional body design, the plugs that look like centipede legs, the colors used, it all works so well. It's a spectacular win for Umukade in this case. Match 129, Confrontation Beast Archer Fish Fist Puote versus Akumun. And I'm happy to say I'm a fan of both of these designs. They both have an obvious concept while not being super boring. Puote is based off of an archer fish, which shoot water out of their mouths to make insects fall into the water so that they can eat them. And that is evidenced by the cowboy design, the kind of Western with pistols aesthetic. And Akumun is a sleepy sheep, which is obviously a reference to counting sheep as a way to fall asleep. It has a fun onesie and a pillow it uses to answer questions or express itself, which I also think is cute. Both are good, but Puote is going to take it just because of all the little details and the way that every inch of him is being used to further the design aesthetic. Match 130, Elsa versus Flytrap Monster. Of all the humans, Elsa isn't exactly my favorite, but her black leather design is at least full body, and her like second haircut is pretty nice with like the little pony in the back. Flytrap Monster has a nice inspiration, but it's not executed very well. I'd really like to see how a monster would be done in a more budgeted season if it was based off of a Flytrap. But unfortunately, in this case, Elsa will be moving on. For match 131, we have Bakuki versus Trinoid number 8, Kinmokusei Kamakakushi. Bakuki is another one where I can't help but wonder if a higher quality photo would help him out. Because he's based off of a Baku and Freddy Krueger, which in terms of like Nightmare Beast combos, that's like a match made in heaven. But based on what I'm seeing, it's not enough. I'll just call him number 8 because I don't want to say that name again. He's a Trinoid, which are normally a plant and animal combined. And in this case, he is a yellow osmanthus and a squid. They don't always work, but this one does, so it will be moving on. Match 132, Beam Doggler versus Sadist Gaugen. Another in a long line of Dogglers who will be losing the match, mostly because of the unclear and muddled design. Dogglers, you've heard this all before. Please consult your design team. But what I want to talk about is our winner, because Sadist Gaugen, who is based on God, but is called a sadist, which honestly is like a 10 out of 10 take. I didn't know being a sadist was a crime. But I guess being a sadistic god definitely could be. So he will ascend into the next round. Match 133, Tombstone Shadow versus Batissier. And this might be one of our first shadows, which are a faction made of possessed objects and are usually done really well. Tombstone is a good introduction to this, with the spectral shadows and the cool details kind of securing the win over the Tooth Decay monster, which is disgusting and not even done well. So I am very happy to never have to see him ever again in my life. Match 134, Mamori Suyoindiver versus Nadira. And oh, Nadira, you would have loved Sabrina Carpenter, the Pink Pony Club, and Brat Summer. She is the original It Girl. She had nails that could extend at will, and the pink and white is just a fierce combination. Mamori is another one of those long-named bastards that don't do much for me, especially next to the Queen of Girly Pop, so Nadira will be sashaying into the next round. Match 135, Okagaruge versus Kappa Mozu. And I'll be 1,000 with you. Okagaruge could have been a lot worse and still won, but I really like the colors, and the decrepit squid look with all of those like beautiful blues works really well. The major issue for me with Kappa Mozu is how much of an incel he looks like. Like, the sticky maw of the mouth, the, like, strange eyes that deprive you of a good place to look at, and, like, the just wet, slimy look of the rest of his body. Hit the showers, because you're not moving on. I'll tell you that for free. Match 136, Suto Iji versus Gokumaru. And for me, this one comes down to detailing. Gokumaru has this awesome detailing and sculptural work, and is just a joy to look at, all of the little gold stylings. And Suto Iji is just not. He's based on a cicada, which doesn't come through at all, and he's mostly just wearing a huge leather jacket, which is not exciting in the slightest, especially when it comes to Power Rangers villains of all things. Gokumaru for the win. Match 137, Doto Musha versus Sanyo. And this one is so heartbreaking because they're both just top tier designs. Like the pinnacle of what I would show people Power Rangers wise. I went back and forth on this one a lot because on one hand we have Doto Musha, who is a lobster samurai, and every single detail is done to perfection. All the armor and also all the choices of like where and how to do the armor, where and when to do the references to lobsters. But also, on the other hand, we have Sanyo, who is covered from head to toe in a beautiful gold. It has spikes and snapping turtle shell design and very nice touches of black some places, fur in other places. It's with a very heavy heart that I say Sanyo will be losing this one, but just barely. I can't say that enough. R.I.P. to my king Sanyo. Match 138. Baron Sakura versus Trinoid number 3, Tensai Chic. Remember before when I said that some of the Trinoids don't work? This is one of them. It's a sugar beet and a rhino who is also a psychic. And that's all just like nonsense in terms of his actual look. I'm not seeing it basically any of that. Baron Sakura, however, king behavior, just has such ridiculous shoulders and literally looks like a tree got up and started raising hell. Very beautiful and very haunting in some ways, so he'll be sapping up the win. Match 139, Cutterloid versus Jogon of the Ningyo. And let's be so for real about this. Cutterloid is just so boring. Like, Jogon of the Ningyo, yokai-based monster, is just way more interesting to look at. Even though, like, the silverfish is a scourge to my existence because I have some skin conditions and they love to eat dead skin. But I will not be holding that against Jogon of the Ningyo, who will be taking the win here because it's still better than Cutterloid. Match 140, Konikiji versus Arms Dealer Banjin. Once again, the baby-themed monsters are not it for me. It's not nearly as bad as Bara Baby, in case you're wondering, like, my tier list of the awful baby monsters. But Banjin, my simplistic martial artist king, is going to be my winner here. And honestly, it's just nice to look at compared to the other one as, like, a break from all of the, like, weird nonsense. Match 141, Generator Bankai versus Black Cross Führer. Generator Bankai isn't that much worse than Crossfear, but the margin is still there, just like by a little bit. Crossfear has some pretty good design despite being from the first season, and Generator Bankai just doesn't surpass like that basic level of design follow through. So Crossfear will be moving on. Match 142. Kurosunigo of 5,000 Celsius versus Beautiful Zurimer. And I think on paper, Kurosunigo is probably a better design if we were just talking like serious competitive design only. But I like to have fun around here. I have purple hair, for God fucking sake. And so Beautiful Zurimer, I think, gets credit for just being so camp. This is a regular like minion monster that would normally be with a bunch of the other ones, and it just decided to become a drag queen as the main villain of the week. And I think that is so funny. Props to whoever thought of that, not only for having to save on design budget, but also for it just being hilarious in the context of the show. I think it's great. So Beautiful Zurimer, you will be moving on into the next round. Match 143, Nurikabe versus Hammer Chameleon. Hammer versus Brick. Can I make it any more obvious? But no, Hammer Chameleon, it has really interesting color choices, and hammers all over is so camp to me. Nurikabe isn't bad. I like all the graffiti and like different materials that went into being part of the wall. But on the whole, Hammer Chameleon is going to be our smashing winner. Match 144, the Omnipotent God versus Billiard Shadow. And you were named the Omnipotent God, and you're a brain in a jar? Billiard Shadow has some really nice attention to detail with the curtains of the billiard table and the chair legs as his legs. And so it is going to be Brain Ball in corner pocket, and it is going to be a win for Billiard Shadow. Match 145, Hanadora versus Doltakian Manamurk. Hanadora is the pope of a revival cult on Valentine's Day, and Doltakian Manamurk is a human man, and not even one that came giving interesting looks. He's just wearing regular human clothes. Hanadora wins. Match 146, 3D Printer Jamin versus Joshaku Lloyd. And Joshaku Lloyd is a magnet monster. And the main thing I'd like to point out with him are the iron fillings that make up his hair and the non-curved magnets on his arms. I think those are both really interesting ways to still give magnet without just being the simple, like, red and blue horseshoe. 3D Printer Jamin is a Jamin, this time with a box on its head and a puzzle piece staff. And for what purpose? Who knows? But what I do know is that Joshaku Lloyd is going to be moving on. Match 147, Baradrill versus Confrontation Beast Anglerfish Fist Mukoa. And I like Baradrill well enough. I like how he's a thick boy, TM. But we also have the Anglerfish Man, who has really cool etchings into his body that remind me of like old ruins. And the staff he uses is one of my favorites when it comes to weapons. I love like a two-pronged kind of trident, I guess dident. I also like the spots on his shoulders and the little anglerfish thing, so he is going to win for sure. Match 148, Theater World versus Porto. And Porto is really ugly. He's from that same Turbo season where they just forgot what good design is, I think. And he's like a marshmallow with one of those like weird mouth things that was in every single board game for some reason, circa like 2008. But he is not as ugly as Theater World, who is just a light purple weirdo, which I understand is ironic given how I'm currently dressed. But he's also seemingly has no theater theming whatsoever, which if you're going to be ugly, you might as well hit your theme right. So, Porto, congrats. You get a pass this round. I would not unpack your bags. I don't think you're going to be here very long. Match 149, Cat Juto versus Zagai. And Cat Juto is one of the Juto, artificial life forms that are like a trio that are all based on origami. The black and blue design is so nice to look at, and the leather just increases its appeal even more for me. It's really nice. I see what Zagai is going for, and the color reminds me of like an early 90s obsession with like slime and slime-based fluids that were these colors, but it just doesn't really work that well for me. I think some uses of black to highlight things would have helped, but honestly, Cat Juto was the winner all along. Match 150, Cheetah Mozu versus Bara Magma. And Mozu are all animal machine hybrids, and I think this is the way to do it correctly, matching a cheetah with high-speed vehicle parts to further accentuate its speed, kind of making sure that you're sticking with what it's already good at. Bara Magma, despite the name, is based off of a rock drill, not magma, which is pretty boring, pun intended, compared to Cheetah Mozu. And although I like the monochrome orange, the cheetah is going to race into the second round for me. Match 151, Gamuro of the Kappa versus Bara Guard. And do you see, Kappa Mozu, do you see from the showers of loss that this is how you do a Kappa in a way that's fun and interesting to look at? He also has some tick inspiration, which all contributes to some of the same elements of looking slimy and gross, but in more of like a effective, scary way than in like a foolish, oh no, don't touch me kind of way. Bara Guard isn't bad, but he's supposed to be like a locomotive guard-based monster, and I don't think he delivers on either of those inspirations very well. So, Gamuro is going to move on to the next round. Match 152, Kairi Kibo versus 100-faced High Priest Chaos. Now, for the one person who watched the last video, Chaos probably looks familiar because his descendant, Chaos, was in the last video. And the main differences have just revolve around how many shoulder spikes they have. I think the design still works really well as like this profit monger with a hellish look and the matching book. And Kairi Kibo almost won, but there's some like little things like the white neck piece and the overall like clunkiness of his design holds him back for me. Chaos wins. Match 153, Omikuji World versus One-Eyed Boma. And I really want to like One-Eyed Boma. And in some ways I do, but it's kind of a hot mess. He's supposed to be a monk, but he has this weird like mushroom raft around his neck, and the strange spikes coming from his head make him look like a character from Ed, Edd n Eddy. It's just, no. Omikuji World's geometric design works well with this type of industrial bodysuit that the world monsters use. And the mask is interesting to look at by itself, so he'll be scooting on, but like just slightly. Match 154, Yokai Kappa versus Masked Devil Boma. Another Boma and another Kappa, and that, fun fact, is how real random selection works. Weird coincidences that are kind of annoying, but also kind of fun, because it means I get to talk about all the Kappas at the same time. This Kappa is fused with a fire extinguisher, which I honestly think is the worst thing about it. Like, I like the helmet. I like the red even, if they could have found just a way to just do that. But the shoulder pauldrons, the, like, tubes, and the way they decided to do his feet as, like, the handles of the fire extinguishers is a interesting and subversive concept, but I don't feel like it's delivering well enough on what it needs to be doing. Masked Devil Boma is a devil man, and especially given the time that this came out, the mask actually holds up really well today, and the touches of like the black fur and the little emeralds on his body, along with his like eyeless face, which is always going to be creepy, We'll be moving him to the next round, although I have to shout out Yokai Kappa for at least not being an incel. Match 155, Kajimarian Benji versus Maralka. And Maralka should work a lot better than it does. It's based off of silicone, and it looks like an origami monster, but there's something about the way they did the head area that's not really doing it for me. I'm no origami master, but I feel like there were better ways to do the head than this like strange triangle, if that's kind of what the goal was. And it's a shame because Benji isn't even doing anything groundbreaking. But the black armor pieces alone remind me of a crab or like maybe a beetle are enough to beat out Maralka. But the green parts hold him back from actually being a good design. You survived this time, Benji, but I want you to watch yourself. Match 156. MM Shurisuke versus Balloon Ninja Gomubiran. God, where do I even start with this one? Okay. First and foremost, Gomubiran, I like you. I'm sorry you had to see this. Please just go wait in the next round's green room, and we'll call you when we're ready. Shurisuke looks like an offensive stereotype of seemingly every ethnicity at one time. And even if I could excuse the racism Brita style, he's just so fucking ugly. The mouth area is a particular no for me, and the costume besides that is just like skin-colored trash with what looks like unzipped parts around his groin that have kind of like a skeleton or an exoskeleton of some sort. No thank you. Burn it with fire. Burn it all with fire. I never want to see him again. Thanks. Match 157. Amigard versus Dengekeki. Now this is a nice palette cleanser, I have to say. We have Dengekeki with a military design reminiscent of the Changeman series of Sentai that he has inspiration from. And we've got Amigard, the obviously Norse-themed Viking. For me, Dengekeki being from a series where they reuse the bodysuits isn't my favorite. And when you compare that to Amigard, who has so many interesting little details that are amazing, it's a shutout. And I'd specifically like to call out on Amigard today the like little belt fall with all of the little shield designs that are kind of Norse inspired. I just think that's a very nice showing from Amigard, and I think I would like to welcome him to the next round. Match 158, the Bucross versus Reward Sima Beast Garaga. And I'm not quite sure what it is about Bucross's material that they use that makes it look so cheap, but it does. I mean, it looks like one of those like really cheap plastic toys with like the little beads inside that would rip if you like pulled it a little bit too hard. It just looks floppy and ready to fall over. Garaga is a crow and an organized crime monger that I think isn't super evident, but it's enough to soar him to the next round against the Bucross, who will be going back to the discount bin. Match 159, Evil Electro King Javius the First versus Chemical Firefighter Brigade Big Dowser. And Big Dowser is truly just doing the bare minimum with his bumblebee-looking aesthetic, but Javius the First is truly just an eyeball, which is like so disappointing given the name, because he sounds like he'd be really cool, but similar to the Omnipotent God, it's just a circular object. Not a fan. Big Dowser goes to the next round. Match 160, Mantle versus Drill Bankai. And here we are, an actual matchup. Mantle is based off of a Matador, and I love a lot of the things about it. The suit, the little touches that still make it clear he's an alien, and the color scheme overall are really good. And on the other side, we've got Drill Bankai, who isn't super high concept, but I love the little details of using different types of blades and drills and excavation tools all over his body. It just makes him look like he's incredibly dangerous to be around, and in a fun way. The cohesiveness of his whole design will end up taking him over Mantle, but good job today, Mantle. I hope to see you back for All-Stars. Match 161, Gra Doggler versus Gorilla Canth. And it's another Doggler and another loss for the Dogglers. At this point, I'm convinced there's someone out there who loves these designs and will become my arch nemesis. But Doggler is just, he's so gross to look at. It's like if you split open someone's neck and peeled it back. And I know that's gross, but that's how I feel when I look at him. And I just had to share that with all of you at home. Gorillacanth is a funny looking robot. So that Himbo Robo will move on. Do better, Dogglers. I really want to see you succeed, but we're just not there yet. Match 162, Itan Momin versus Flying Squirrel Mozu. And Flying Squirrel Mozu is trying so hard, and I love that for him. I love him for that. The cute little guy, but Itan Momin is so effective with like its ghostly biker vibe that makes it look like it like has his body being blown off by the wind. It's very cool. Sorry, Flying Squirrel Mozu, you lose, but you can have a treat just because you're so cute. Match 163, Ryu Doggler versus Dragon Dark King Salamandes. Dragon fight! Dragon fight! To his credit, Ryu Doggler is better than a lot of his brethren. He has lamprey, like sub-theming, and like just a very effective design compared to his contemporaries. But Salamandes takes the cake easily, and he's probably a little insulted that I even called them both dragons, which he can stew about in the next round. Tell it to your mama, because I don't care. Match 164, Lady Ring versus Tiger Mask. I like the concept of the three ladies from what would become Zeo. They're based off of a ring, an earring, and a necklace, but the designs just like don't do it justice for me. Like if you're Lady Ring, if that's like your whole thing, then why do you only have one on? At least that I can see. Maybe she has like little ones on her fingers, but if you are not going to be painting for the back of the room, then like what's even the point here? You know what I mean? Like the ring itself isn't even that ornate. Like it just looks like something you got from a fucking ring pop. On the other hand, we have the crown jewel of the first season, Tiger Mask. This is how you do it with limited supplies, folks. The colors, the placement, the mask itself. Oh, God, I love it so much. Easy win for Tiger Mask. And it's not just because I have 2 tiger tattoos, although that should show you how much I love the tiger theming in general. Match 165, Mogari versus Chubo. This is actually an interesting case where the character's personality being excluded helps Chubo a lot. Because I couldn't stand him when I watched Ninja Storm. He was like an idiot and just like shady, went behind people's backs, betrayed them, and then like would get caught because he was just that dumb. But if we're looking at strictly design, which we are, he's the go-to winner, specifically like the centipedes on his headpiece and the green like fire design on his shoulders are standouts for me at the moment. Mogari isn't bad, but like the statue design just isn't enough against the second spear Chobu. Match 166, Dora Gunrock versus Licking Boma. And this one is another race to the bottom, unfortunately. Dora Gunrock looks so hodgepodge, but the more I look at it, the more I kind of like it. Like, it looks like it could have crawled from a nearby rock face, and I wouldn't even notice. Kind of similar to how, like, Taluses look very weird from, like, Legend of Zelda because they're meant to be a rock monster. And, yeah, Dora Gunrock looks like it would just pop out of the mountain and then get me. You know what I mean? The only thing Licking Boma is getting is a court summons for public indecency and gross imposition. There's something about like the turducken look of it that's freaking me out and not in a good way. So Gunrock is going to move on. Match 167, Urawadashi versus Sylph Minosaur. And I remember taking a test in high school psychology that looked at your drawings and how they mirrored your psychology. And I remember drawing a lot of sharp edges, and my teacher made a comment about how that means I have an aggressive personality style, which, to be fair, she kind of ate with that one. But anyway, Soph Minosaur looks like he was made for that exact version of me. Like, it's all sharp edges, it's all angles. It's like so cool to look at. I just love it so much. Uruwadashi isn't even bad. He's from one of the like design families that I like a lot more, but you just can't compete with the Soph here, unfortunately. Match 168, Diamond Dimension versus Nora Nikelar. I wish Diamond Dimension had more diamonds. Like, I feel like that's the prompt, sweetie. Like, I feel like that's what you named yourself after. I would love if you actually delivered on your design aesthetic, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That's something to critique in the next round, because against Nora Nikelar, anyone looks like a rock star. It's just so ugly. So Diamond Dimension wins. I hope you can buy more diamonds in the meantime. Match 169, Gagira Doggler versus Galactic Fang Zaza. And the real shame here is in the lack of high quality images for these two. I'm inclined, based on past experiences, to think that Gagira Doggler wouldn't have done a ton for me, but it's a shame that he didn't get to really compete. I think that would be a shame regardless of the faction you're from. Zaza is doing just enough with her little egg helmet to edge out the win, but like, don't get comfortable. Match 170, Key Jester versus Ghost Canth. Ghost Canth could have probably taken it if they took a little bit more time to make sure that all of the like black costuming doesn't get lost within itself. But as it currently stands, it's really hard to make out like the actual details. That's not to say that Key Jester is bad. Like, I think he could have won against a good amount of monsters, but I like the use of keys and locks and keyholes all over his body, specifically in this case. Key Jester is going to take the win in this round. Match 171, Wilson versus Lovelian Balance. And Wilson is the partner of Herlock Sholmes, the very first match we had, and the very first winner we had, and the correct coloring of Magadapone, and overall a very cool, intimidating raccoon dog monster. I love how like bulky and like enforcer he looks. Lovely and Balance looks like a diseased sea monkey, so Wilson will be joining his colleague in the winner's circle for round 1. Match 172, Batsian Zortak versus Ancient Fish Monster. And I've said this for a while now, that red and silver is an underused color combination. And although I wish it was a brighter red to really accentuate the contrast, I think Zortak is delivering on that design aesthetic. His tubes don't make a ton of sense, but I'm choosing to believe he just likes them, like the little freak that he is. Ancient Fish Monster, I like the camp thing that you're going for, and I like the cool coloring that you've got going on, but it's just not your time, my dear. I'm going to need you to get out before they close the doors. Match 173, Axe Bear versus Zados. I am a huge fan of bears in general, evidenced by my chest tattoos, which I will not be showing because of how YouTube is, and this is no exception. I like how the fuzziness of the frame works well in this case, because it looks like someone got a little bit too close to the Axe Bear, and he just decided to maul them. Zados is cool too. I like the kind of like spectral fish vibe and the castle-like body, but Axe Bear is just so like fierce in both meanings, so he'll chop to the win. Match 174, Sports Monster versus Bottle Shadow. And oh, Sports Monster, you would have loved the Olympics. He's actually pretty well designed, but the sleek bodysuit almost makes me wish he were part of a squad of monsters rather than being by himself. Bottle Shadow is another resounding W for the shadows in general, with the two faces being white and red for, I like to believe, a reference to wine. And the woven thatch body, the wine opener trident. I mean, come on now. You already know. Bottle Shadow is aging into the next round. Match 175, Margarita versus Kokolar. And we have Anteater versus Moss. Who will win? There are things I like a lot about Margarita, like the claws and the inspiration of an anteater. But why is the center giving more cat than anteater? It's a shame, because I love anteaters, and I love the concept of a Power Rangers monster based on an anteater. Kokolor is based off of moss, which you can't tell for multiple reasons. But in the case with many Lars, the design is really clunky, so Margarita will be sniffing out the W on this one. Match 176, Magnet Bankai versus EE Musu Binofu. And it's kind of a shame, because EE is actually on the better side of the Turbo monsters, but Magnet Bankai is just very sick. The cast iron look on the whole body really just shows off like the post-apocalyptic vibe, and in this case, the like Camp Cupid monster just isn't enough to beat that out. Although EE Musu Binofu does get points for not just being like a strange racial characterization of a monster. Match 177, Vice Jamin versus Famloid. And there's a lot of things that they choose to make into Jamins that I'm just like incredibly confused by, and Vice is one of them. And it's not even like Vice like something that is an addiction or a weakness. That would be really cool. It is a device just like to hold things in place. And I'm sorry, that's whack. That's dumb. Especially in a bodysuit season where you don't even get to fully deliver on the concept. Why would you choose to make the head of your monster just a vice, of all things? Also, just as a side note, the bodysuits show off, like, everything. So, do with that what you will. Famloid is a lot cooler looking than his name would suggest. I think the blue and white design is really effective, and he will be blowing into the next round. Match 178, Trash Dimension versus Yu Yu Uso. Yu Yu Uso has a lot going for it, specifically that he looks like if somebody that I followed on Instagram was injected with tiger DNA, but the head shape doesn't make a ton of sense to me, and the pants/shoes, while campy, are not really done super well. Meanwhile, King of Camp himself, Trash Dimension, is done so well. I like how it truly looks like a moving trash heap rather than just some like random items stringed together. Trash Dimension will be moving on. Match 179, Garuge Doggler versus Computer Dragon. And what is the deal with the Dogglers submitting their photos in complete darkness? I'm just saying, it's not entirely my fault that I don't like them. Compared to other Dogglers, this one could be kind of cool as like a man-eating plant based on the concept art, but the Computer Dragon is actually a really effective execution. They knew exactly where to leave the dragon parts and what could be robotic to make it more functional, and honestly, it's just done really like cleanly, so it will soar into the next round easily. Match 180, Poison Boma versus Trinoid 13, Mukaden Pansy. Insect mashup match. Poison Boma doesn't work as well for me, being a like gross color scheme. And although it's supposed to be based off of a scorpion, it doesn't really work that well. Like, I'm not really getting scorpion as much as I'm getting like camel spider. Like, it's just kind of nasty. It's one of those like freaky arachnids, you know. In fact, it kind of looks like if you were to like kill a spider and when all of its like limbs kind of scrunch up into like a ball. It's just it's a no, and I hate that for it. 13 is based on a centipede, radio waves, and a pansy, the flower, not the derogatory term, and it's pretty effective. At their best, I think the Trinoids which are basically anyone with a number in front of their name, can use their multiple inspirations in a really cohesive way. And this is a good example by using the flowers as satellite dishes to minimize real estate while still delivering on the multiple concepts. And the antennae on the antennae, very cool. 13, we'll move on. Match 181, Time Brain versus Iron Ring Mask. While it's clear that Iron Ring Mask is much more like low budget, there are some things that transcend that, such as good use of color and geometry. Specifically in the arms and the chest, I like the way that it looks like there is a red body being kind of contained by all of these different silver rings. And it makes it look a lot more high-end than it probably was, given the budget of the first season. Time Brain, besides the clock on its shoulder that you can't even really see that well in this picture, isn't really giving time to me, like, at all. But even if we, like, ignore that, like, maybe it's like a translation thing, I don't know. The beige and orange palette does nothing for me. It's just not very good to look at. So Iron Ring Mask will be moving on. Match 182, Mecha Crisis versus Hexanoid. Mecha Crisis would be so much more effective if it had a different face than, like, the goofy eyes on its chest. It makes it hard to see him as very threatening, which is unfortunate because everything else about him, I think, works relatively well. The same can't be said for Hexanoid, which, as I touched on earlier, Trinoids are 3 things together, and based on the name, a Hexanoid is 6 things put together. Specifically, fireworks, a bikini, a pimple, a bee, Venus, and an eggplant. Why these were the things that were chosen, I have no clue. Kind of seems like a random generator to me, but I trust the Power Ranger design sensibilities in this case. Also, if you told me that Hexanoid was on season 17 of Drag Race, I would believe you. She is very maximalist, but honestly, everything works together well enough to not be too distracting in this case. I think you can see like the little design inspirations of each of those 6 things I mentioned earlier throughout the design, and that's all I really ask for. She will move on. Match 183, Dolmar versus the Seguil brothers. And Dolmar haunts my dreams from seeing him in Lost Galaxy. I don't even remember, like, the context that he was in, but I remember seeing him for the first time doing this tournament and, like, being like, oh no, like, I remember you. But looking at him as an adult, there isn't a ton working in terms of, like, details for me. Like, the red and blue is really nice. I like all the leather. But I think the Seguil brothers are going to edge out slightly in this case. They're based off of jump roping, and jump ropes make up their hair and all of the detailing on their bodies, which I think is really smart and intentional. I also like the streetwear look of them. And although I feel like it needs to be said that there might be bits of caricature in here of, like, hip-hop and African-American culture, which is kind of problematic, there's nothing, at least to my relatively untrained eye, that is inherently meant to be derogatory. It looks more like reverence to me than slander, and so they'll be jumping into the next round. But I'm curious. I want to know what your thoughts are in the comments. Match 184, Zyhan versus Special Duty Officer Berazorg. Treasure Monster versus the monster from the Pirate season. I think Zyhan has all of the right ingredients to be a good Power Ranger design. Like, all of the references in his design and the way they're positioned is clever. I think especially, like, the money bags as the shoulders is really interesting to me. But there's something about it that's not working very well, in my opinion. And I think it might be something about, like, the face. Like, I don't know if maybe the gems need to be done differently or the crown or something. There's just something about it that's not clicking for me. Either way, Berazorg is a pirate/knight cyborg, and I like the execution of this design a lot. the like covered eye, the very detailed metal body, the arm guard, the sword. It's very cool. He will be moving on in this case. Match 185, Robo-Brain versus Yomosugari. Do I even need to explain this one? Okay, fine. Robo-Brain is way too simple for me, especially as a robot in a sea of robots. Yomosugari has a really awesome take on Crow, and the use of red and blue here is immaculately done. I am very happy to say that Yomosugari is the winner. Match 186, Junkenki versus Needleloid. Now, normally I would advise against using the same bodysuit for multiple monsters, because I think that's kind of boring. But if you have to do it, I would say at least make it look good and cohesive. Like in the case of Junkenki, where the upper body matches pretty well with his lower body, making it seem like it could be a cohesive design. Needleloid isn't even horrible, but there's just a little too much going on. He's supposed to be like an amalgamation of hospital equipment, and I think we've seen with some monsters that there's a way to kind of hint at all of those things in a way that's creative, but I just feel as though this one isn't as intentional looking as I would have liked. Junkenki wins. Match 187, Ikatamajin versus Ko. And a good amount of the gene monsters, as we saw earlier, are two monsters fused together. But that explanation can only go so far when it looks like this one does. The egg part is better than the squid part by a lot. But the squid part just looks like a creep. I think the way that the squid's like patterning makes it look like smiles and wrinkles just isn't really working very well. I think they should have thought that out a little bit more. Meanwhile, Ko is that boy. He officially is the Cerberus Fist in terms of his kung fu style, and overall has multiple like dog and Anubis inspirations, which culminate in this really sick black and gold and steel design, head and collar above Ikatamajin. Ko, you're a good boy, and you get to move forward. Match 188, Tensuki versus Bara Pinakiller. While Tensuki's head and body don't match super well, the theme of the season that they're based on is like angels. And in a roundabout way, if I do the mental gymnastics, it kind of looks like a heaven and hell kind of design concept. I don't think that's what they're going for, but I do really fuck with it if I look at it from that subjective perspective. Peanut Killer isn't bad, but it's done kind of sloppily for my liking. I think there are cleaner ways to do like the whole like Pinocchio aesthetic, and I'm just not seeing that here, unfortunately, which is a shame because I like that kind of creature inspiration, but Tensuki is going to take it in this case. Match 189, Sugo versus Trinoid 10, Charkuru Marguerite. And I regret to inform all of you that Charkuru Marguerite, despite looking very cool, will be a sacrificial lamb to our king, Sugu, who is a white tiger mixed with a chimera, and the like gold and white combo and like the little touches of blue in there, it's just so fucking good. And it's kind of a shame because I do like things about Charkuru Marguerite, but it's just not. I mean, it's barely even a matchup at this point. Like Sugu is just a king in all forms, so he will be winning in this case. Match 190, Ghost Monster versus Electricity Mask. And I go back and forth on this one a lot because Ghost Monster has a cool mask, and that's about it. And Electricity Mask, despite the name, only has a cool body and not a cool face. And like either way, they're not amazing, so like who really cares? But right in this moment, I'm feeling Ghost Monster a bit more, so he will be moving on to the next round. Match 191, Mushroom World versus Bag Shadow. The bodysuit for Mushroom World is so badly matched up, and it's kind of a shame because I do like the like purple bits of actual like Mushroom World design. But Bag Shadow, the Grim Reaper, and like purse themed guy, winner absolutely. Like there is a lot I have to say good about his design, but part of me wants to like save that for his match next round because even if he was just a bag with a face on it, he might have beat Mushroom World in the first place. And he will be reaping a Mushroom World soul to get into the next round. Match 192, Scorpion Nezire versus Absolute God and Ma. Scorpions have and will be done much better than this. And contrary to many of the previously really cool names, Absolute God and Ma delivers on the sick name, looking absolutely like the god of hell, which is what he's kind of supposed to be. Having some cool Cthulhu elements and just generally being a very effective final villain for the season he's from. I specifically love like the squid shoulders that like crawl all the way down. Absolute W from Absolute God and Ma. He will be moving on to the next round with a hellish flourish. Match 193, PP Rappa versus Dr. Zazoria. And part of me feels bad for the Turbo Monsters because maybe, like, I just don't get it. Like, maybe there's a sect of, like, Japanese fans of Turbo who, like, live for these monster designs so much. But, like, I'm not that girl, unfortunately. I just don't get it. Like, how much of it is, like, bad budget versus how much of it is, like, a sense of humor that I'm just not a part of and, like, camp that, like, I'm just not tuned into. I don't know. If you have any ideas, I'd love to hear it, but I personally don't get it. Je ne sais pas. But what I do know is that Dr. Zazoria, despite being just a woman in clothes, will be taking the win in this case. Match 194, Cantate Lloyd versus Dimensional Drifter Givaldi. And Cantate Lloyd is a fusion monster between a katana-wielding sword monster and a knight's shield-wielding monster. And despite the juxtaposing colors, I think it works really well. I think that concept of like East meets West is really fascinating. Givaldi is another alien where I just don't super see like a clear inspiration, which would be fine if the design was serviceable by itself, but it's just not. I really don't think it is in this case. So Cantate Lloyd will move on as a unity of the East and West together. Match 195, Spray Bankai versus Pot Bankai. And Bankai on Bankai Prime is such a shame. It's going to go to Spray Bankai in this case due to the color choices and the interesting use of armor. I think Pot Bankai isn't terrible, but there's like something about the face and limbs that's not really working that well for me. I think it could just take a few adjustments and it would probably be a lot better. But as it stands now, I'm just not a huge fan. Match 196, Apostle of Infinity, Vafa versus Coella Monger. And Yafa is an amoeba, a crystal, and a composer. Specifically Mozart, of all the composers. And there's a ton going on with that. And it's done, like, somewhat effectively as a big villain. I feel like one of the things that kind of works for it from a design perspective is like with the big villains, they're able to be seen on screen for a lot longer, and so you can kind of digest their overly complicated designs in like in a longer period of time than you can with the villain of a weak monsters. Coella Monger is really reminiscent of like an old school monster movie from America, specifically like Creature from the Black Lagoon, but I think part of that is like the very muted kind of black and white color palette, which is one of the reasons Yafa is going to move on instead, but like just barely. I still like Coella Monger a lot. Match 197, Dora Frankie versus Shika Banin. This is so close. So close. We have monster movie match all over this hoe. Shikabaden is a very reminiscent example of xenomorphs with lamprey theming as well. Dora Frankie, though, is Frankenstein, obviously, but what really clinches it for him, in my opinion, once again, very slightly, is the zombie Frankie version, which is honestly like pretty terrifying, especially considering the era that it came out in and the possibility that it is a kid show. Just kind of adds to the overall freak factor in a way that I really really enjoy. And like the mace for some reason feels like a great weapon choice for him. So yeah, this is another one where I feel like it's a shame that Shikabanen got out in the first round, but in some ways that's the really fun part about doing these tournaments is there's unexpected twists and turns all over the place, and that is what makes it interesting to do from my perspective. Match 198, Nue versus Dr. Anton. And while Dr. Anton is a very dapper, mature man, in terms of a villain, the design doesn't do much, and Nue is at least giving something interesting to look at, so he'll be moving on. Sorry, Dr. Anton, try better next time. Match 199, Devon versus Confrontation Beast Buffalo Fist Gyuya. Devon is a victim of budget and material, I think, because the idea for it to be like a hulking, scary, like black tentacle monster that just kind of like stands in the background and is really imposing is, I think, really effective, but the way it's implemented doesn't deliver as well as it could have. Gyuya has some really nice touches of the red cape for matadors, and the nose ring on its chest that doubles as like a belt, I think, is really interesting. The giant horns with like the skeletal white face is all just very good attention to detail. That's going to be a win for Gyuya. For match 200, we have Targate of the Satellite versus Bara Crusher. And Targate is such a... Man, Targate is such an intimidating little furry, isn't he? I think the pseudo mustache and like the little mouth are the parts that make me not take him seriously, like at all. I think Bara Crusher is doing what the Baras do best by not conforming to like normal human parameters of like body. I like how it looks like a steel T-Rex or like a piranha monster. It's really effective in my mind. Plus, the color combos are really good. It looks like it could be fast as hell, which is pretty scary, and it will be sprinting into the winner's circle. Well, here we are again. That was part 2, and I must say it was so much nicer and faster without that guy at the beginning yapping for 10 minutes straight about all the rules and regulations and blah blah blah. Either way, thank you so much for watching. I think it's nice to have the separation between the different rounds because it kind of allows me to talk about the different factions than last time. I'm sure next time we'll be able to talk about different factions than this time. And I will see you beautiful people all in the next round for part 3, which will have a turbo inspiration of some kind. I just have to figure out what that will be. All right. Bye.